May 1992, for the 9th time in 9 consecutive years, the Montreal Canadiens met the Boston Bruins in the NHL playoffs. It looked like business as usual for both teams, a traditional playoff battle. You had to believe that Montreal had the advantage after winning the season series with 5 wins, 2 losses, and 1 tie. And with the superior season record, the Canadiens had home ice advantage. But the Bruins managed to pull off a surprise 6-4 victory in the first game with 2 third-period goals. Game 2, meanwhile, was an absolute classic that went to overtime.
Trying to hold it in on the boards. 4 seconds left, and we're gonna go to overtime.
In the end, the Bruins managed to pull away with an incredible goal in overtime after taking advantage of a favorable line change.
Boston coming close. Score! Dura scores for the Boston Bruins.
And no, your eyes and ears are not really deceiving you. We're going to play 2 games today, not just 1. So we're going to have a little bit of a change here to our plan as long as this playoff run continues with this game. So if you're kind of new to this, I'll sort of let you know what we're doing here. What we're playing is the Super Nintendo version of NHLPA 93 as opposed to the Genesis version. There's not really any special reason why I've decided to do the Super Nintendo one over the Genesis. I originally played the Genesis version, and then I thought when I was playing this game that, you know, I might as well try something and try one of these 7-game series type setups and stuff. And this is kind of where we've gotten. So we're going to continue playing this. Like I said, we'll play the first 2 games of this series here today, one after the other, and sort of see how we do. So we'll see what happens. We ended up doing a little bit better in the first series against Hartford than I was expecting us to do. And so as a result, we have this sort of ability to bring this series a little bit further than I ever thought it was going to go. I mean, having not played this game on the Super Nintendo at all and being kind of unfamiliar with it as we score a goal. How about that? So Mueller ends up getting it, and it's 1-0 Montreal just like that. Having not been fully familiar with this series, especially on the Super Nintendo, I was expecting it to be a lot more difficult than this, but apparently we've actually done quite well. So we'll see if we can keep it up. So far, it's been a lot of fun, I'll tell you that. And we'll see how we do in terms of this particular game of the series. But we did pretty well against Hartford. We won that one in 5. In real life, the Canadiens only won it in 7. And there's the other question, which is, so should I use the French pronunciation? Should I say the English way? Exactly how do we want to do this? I think I should probably focus... And it's 1-1. I should focus a little bit less attention on how I'm saying things, a little bit more attention on how I'm playing. That probably would do us a little bit of good. So, so far so good. I do want to do a little bit more. That's the whole purpose behind this, and doing 2 games at once. Part of the hope is that we can eventually make it so that... well, that was pretty bad, wasn't it? And so now they're starting to score for fun. Part of the hope here is that we can make it so that we have more of these videos that end up being maybe around the 20-minute mark instead of around the 10-minute mark. That's at least the theory behind it. And part of that is because I know, having done YouTube quite a while, that will help a bit with our reach. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what we can do. This is definitely a much harder opponent than Hartford was. That's for sure. So far so good. Now I do have a video to make, like a real video, as in not just a bunch of gameplay for this channel, and you can look forward to that. That's going to come out tomorrow. I also have a basketball one that comes out today that I still have to sit down and edit and put together. The hockey video we're going to make here is probably going to be one that I think a lot of you will enjoy. We're going to talk about hockey in the United States and sort of, at least my theory as to why it's had a hard time catching on over the years. The truth is that the more that I watch, the more I realize that, you know, hockey in terms of like comparison with other sports like, you know, American football and I should say United States football, baseball and the like, hockey is really a sport that lends itself very, very well to television coverage and to all sorts of like drama and all sorts of stuff like that. Right? It's the sort of sport that you would expect to do very, very well on TV. But for whatever reason, in the United States, there's been this like general lack of enthusiasm for showing the sport, lack of desire to sort of showcase it. So anyway, that's kind of what this video is about. We'll see some highlights here from this Stars Blackhawks game. I'm sorry, North Stars Blackhawks game is what I meant to say. 5-3 now, Chicago. So good thing that we watched that. That was very useful for us. So anyway, we'll see what we can do here in this series. We're hoping to escape the fate that the Les Canadiens ended up with in real life. So far, we're not doing a very good job of it. Fairly evenly matched teams, definitely more so than the Whalers were with Montreal. And the problem we have here is our defense is starting to fall apart. So I'm going to need to have a little bit of a rethink here defensively and see if we can do a better job keeping our guys in position instead of having them sort of skate and glide out of position. So let's see what it is we can do. We'll try to bring it up here center ice. And our attempt at a shot doesn't quite work, and this should be icing if we can get there in time, and apparently my defenseman can't, but whoever was there on the left wing ended up getting there in time, so we'll have this face-off in a favorable zone for us. The one thing that surprised me, and you'll see this when the video comes out tomorrow, the one thing that really surprises me is discovering that the NHL actually had a good television package back in 1957. It lasted about 3 years. It was with CBS, but it didn't do so hot after a while. And part of the reason why is because there was a lot of labor dispute about it, because the television package was not figured into payments that went to the players. This is back during the original 6 era, and what I've realized as I've looked at this is that really the whole reason for there only being 6 teams was so that management could keep the cost of employees down. That's what the whole thought process, I believe, was. I'm not sure why the goalie came out of his crease there. He looked like he wanted to take my guy out, so whatever. But that's the thing, the more that I read into it and understand it, the more I see that, it really was, a case of a very anti-competitive behavior. In fact, the same Sports Illustrated, this Sports Illustrated article I was reading about, that TV package, mentioned that in the United States, 3 of the 4 clubs were actually owned by the same family, which definitely calls into question some of the business practices by the NHL at that time. The funny thing about it is that by not having much of a television package in the United States, the NHL really only did damage to itself. So, when you look at it and you kind of think about it, you'll realize that, when the NHL decided that it really needed to expand to the United States, expanded right in like 1967, some of the problems that it had in some of the markets were almost certainly caused by the lack of television coverage. And not just like lack of TV coverage at the time, we're also talking about lack of TV coverage, prior to the fact. Like there was no, very few people really understood the sport because the coverage that it got on United States television, at least, was very, very sparse. In comparison, on Canadian television, so we've seen all 3 games there. On Canadian television, you have, Hockey Night in Canada, which was a beloved, part of the CBC, going back to the radio days of the 1930s. I think it's 1937 is the first real direct reference to Hockey Night in Canada that I found in the old papers. And so, oh man, just barely missed that shot, and he was right in front. Boy, man, that was a real opportunity that we had, and that just went missing. Anyway, so Hockey Night in Canada, is definitely a major, positive feature for the sport in Canada, because it's a lot easier to care about a sport when you can actually follow it. All right, I was thinking, while I was writing this up and making the script and stuff, I thought, well, this is kind of weird because, in the original 6 era, 4 of the 6 teams were in the United States, and yet hockey, the NHL was clearly sort of the Canadian sport. Part of the reason why is because your reservoir of, players and so on were all Canadian, pretty much. My college hockey and so on eventually did start to catch on and become popular in the United States, but, it was very, very much a regional thing for years and years and years. That's the sort of interesting thing about it, right? Like, so all of the professional teams end up being, in like these big eastern cities in the United States. There we go. A little wraparound trick works pretty well. It's Mueller's second goal. Now we're only 1 goal behind, so this is going to be a fierce battle for the finish. But, you know, I mean, you would think, though, that, like, you know, somebody somewhere would be trying to make some money off of the fact that, you know, all of these teams were basically in the United States. You know, but that's not really kind of what happened here in the history of the NHL. Instead, you know, the NHL kind of was only a power in Canada, and the United States side of things was kind of ignored. I really do think it's because there wasn't that, you know, tradition of having, you know, hockey that was accessible, you know, on the radio and then later on television. And the reason why I kind of point the blame at that is because if you want to have any sort of sport that people really care about, you have to figure out a way to get your potential fans, like, interested in your story. Like, in other words, oh, what did we get called for here? I'm not sure what I did wrong, but we're about to lose this game. In other words, like, fans aren't just going to watch the sport because you showed up, right? Fans need to have some sort of connection to what it is that you're doing. That's actually more important than how good or how well or how poorly the sport is being played. Last minute shot, and that just rims out, so much for that. How dare you celebrate? I'm going to take care of you guys. Anyway, that's one of the best parts of this game. So let's go ahead and keep going. I will, just in case, I'll save the state. So we'll go ahead here for the second game. But yeah, this is really one of the major issues. You know, I grew up, of course, in the United States, as you can tell, probably just from my accent alone. You know, the truth is that when I was a kid, I didn't really know all that much about hockey. I didn't really know all that much other than maybe a couple of teams. I mean, everybody back in, you know, probably starting in the late 80s knew who Wayne Gretzky was, right? You know, you talk about, oh, that's an own goal. Keane ends up getting the credit for that, but that's an own goal by Boston, and that's a real break for us. So 1-0 Montreal, and we're not even a minute into this game. So, you know, the thing is that, like, everybody knew the big stars. We knew who Gretzky was. We knew who Lemieux was and all that stuff. If you followed sports at all in the 1990s, you knew who these guys were. But the reality is that, you know, despite the fact that you, like, knew these names and you had, like, an idea of who these guys were, you knew that they were great hockey players, you didn't really know much about them, you know, and so you didn't know much about sort of like what the history was unless you were basically in an area that had the game, or unless you had cable television. Even though if you had cable television in, say, like, you know, the mid 80s, I mean, with the exception of you know, the Stanley Cup playoffs, you probably weren't really able to follow the sport. It would have been really, really difficult to follow the regular season. I think that, you know, ESPN, for example, I think had maybe like 20 games a season or something like that, right? It wasn't really that much, and it's definitely nothing like it is today, where you can actually follow the sport, you know, on a day-to-day basis. Not that I do that. Of course, I probably should. I mean, I'm living, so we live really close to the Washington, D.C. area, and I'm thinking, you know, we live with very, very close proximity to a NHL team that at least has been good in recent years. I'm not so good sure how well they're playing right now. Right, but you know, I mean, it's a sort of sport where, like, the more that you follow it, the more that you pay attention to it, I think the better the sport really is, and the more interesting it is for you. And really, like I said, you know, for all sports, that's kind of the way that it is, right? One of the reasons, for example, why I became a big fan of college football when I was a kid, and you know, by connection to the NFL and stuff, is because my dad and I used to go to see BYU football games like every single Saturday, every time they were at home, because we had season tickets. And because we had season tickets, like, it's really really easy to get to know the team. It's really easy to start to develop that sort of identity, you know, where you're identifying yourself with, you know, sort of your team, your cause, and all that stuff. You know, I mean, that's the sort of thing that you really need to be able to do. Now, to a certain extent, you're only going to be able to do that if you have, like, a local team to follow. But at the same time, like, you know, it's really helpful from a national perspective if you have more exposure to kind of everything that's happening everywhere else. Surprised we're not seeing any highlights from this Minnesota-Chicago game. Gave it kind of a second there, but yeah, we're probably going to see that in the next intermission. Anyway, so that's really what the problem has been, right? So if you're talking about, you know, like, for example, the famous 1990 All-Star game, right, in Pittsburgh, the NHL All-Star game, where they have the God Save America or whatever it was, and everybody's like crying and cheering and all that stuff, right? Like the reality is that for a lot of you know, would-be fans of the sport watching on United States television, this was actually like the first time that people had seen any of these star players, right? Like maybe you had seen Gretzky if you had ESPN. Right, but if you were, you know, like a normal person, you didn't have cable, like the vast majority of us didn't back then, like, you know, you didn't really have the chance to watch him because absolutely nothing was on broadcast television. There we go, 2-0 Canadiens, Les Beaux. So we're doing pretty well. You know, the problem is that, you know, if you don't have anything on, you know, over-the-air television, especially in those days, like, basically, you know, you're limiting the number and type of people who are going to end up watching it. And as I recall, this sort of feeling that a lot of us had is that stuff that was on cable TV was not necessarily like lesser, but it was more of like a niche, right? It was like, you know, sort of a product that like you had to already be a fan of it, or you already had to be interested in it to be, you know, to really want to like watch this, right? As opposed to, you know, like a major sport where normally it's, you know, available for basically general public interest and consumption. Anyway, so as a result, this sort of idea, where's the puck? Oh, I have it. Well, I saw it was about 4 bodies there go flying. It's a great sport, isn't it? But so as a result, you know, for a lot, I think, of people in the United States, hockey was kind of treated as like, you know, this kind of, you know, unusual sport. It's going to be interference on me. Hockey was kind of treated as like this kind of unusual sport that's a real sort of specialty sport where you have, you know, certain types of people interested in it, and you know, you only would become a hockey fan if you had like an actual home team to cheer for. So interesting thing is that for me, when I was a kid, in addition to going to college football games, my dad would take me from time to time to go see minor league hockey. We had the old Salt Lake Golden Eagles that used to play at the old at the Salt Palace, which is long gone, the old Salt Palace. And let me see if we can. There we go. And I mean, I remember going to games all the time when I was a kid. I just absolutely loved it. The Golden Eagles, unfortunately, ended up moving away. It was not a very well-run franchise. We were over in the old International Hockey League. The league did give us a team again. So the old story behind that is in the run-up to the 2002 Winter Olympics, to get the favor of the IOC, Salt Lake City decided to build a hockey-specific arena, which is called the E-Center, and I think that it's still up. It's been a while since I've lived in Utah, so I don't know all of this stuff off the top of my head. Looks like we're not seeing any highlights at all. Kind of odd. Anyway, so the E-Center was like created for hockey. It was kind of a small arena. I want to say it had maybe like 12,000 seats, something like that. Because we had the stadium, they gave us a team. I can't remember where they were originally from, but they gave us a team that they called the Utah Grizzlies. And anyway, so we had the opportunity to go see more of their games. I actually remember seeing them play in a cup match. It was a cup winning match. What was it called? The Turner Cup, I think it was. This would have been 1995 or 96, one of the two. I remember seeing them play in what was the Delta Center, what's now whatever stadium it is that the Mammoth are playing in, whatever we call it these days. I remember going to see that game. In fact, my dad somehow got us tickets that were like ringside. I remember my sister was there too, and we couldn't see a thing. It's such an awful place to watch hockey. Definitely not created to be a hockey arena. This is the first fight that we've had, by the way, in the entire playoffs. How about that? So we've gone through all of these games. We did 5 games of the first series, 2 games of this series, and we finally have a fight. 7 games and we finally get 1. So that gives you an idea of how common it is. Anyway, so yeah, we went and watched, this game and all that stuff. And it's interesting because when you're a kid, you start to, develop like sort of that sense of identity, and you really want to watch the team and stuff. And I mean, my friends and I think all of us were interested in hockey to one extent or another, mostly because it was kind of like, the interesting and fun thing to do. My friends and I in high school were all sort of like, punk rock type kids and stuff like that. And hockey seemed to be, it was just different. It wasn't football, right? It was an exciting sport. It was a very, very fast sport. And to be honest, when I look back in hindsight, it was a really good dump in. When I look back in hindsight, I realized that my friends and I were actually probably like the target demographic for, becoming hockey fans. Really, so anyways, pretty interesting stuff. We would occasionally go to games together. In high school, like we didn't have any money, nobody had a job, so if our parents would take us or whatever, but I do have memories of doing that and going out and checking this stuff out, and it's pretty cool stuff. What I wanted to say with all of this, now that this game is over, is that, even here in the United States, when you're in sort of a non-traditional market, you still have people who are fans of the sport, because we grew up watching it. Maybe we grew up watching minor league hockey or whatever, and so, if you had an NHL that was, I guess, sort of like doing its job, doing what it should be doing, you would probably see it actually take advantage of this stuff. Anyway, let's take a look at this highlight from this game and see if Minnesota comes back. And there you go. So the North Stars end up coming back with a game-tying goal. Are they going to show me another highlight? That's the big question. And there it is, the overtime game winner by Modano. And so there you have it. If you're a North Stars fan, you've got to be dancing in the streets tonight. So that's going to be about it here for at least today's edition of whatever we're calling this. And so I hope you enjoyed that. We'll try to give you 2 games, not probably tomorrow, but the day after. And we'll sort of keep this series going, and I'll give you a few more highlights and stuff. Since we're going to have a 5th game of this series, and there were only 4 played in real life because the Bruins swept them, I'll figure out something else to talk about. So it's going to be interesting. You better tune in to see whatever I'm going to do. Talk to you later.